Good morning. Who has ever experienced the following situation in private or in a business context? There is a problem or someone has a question and no one knows what the correct answer would be or what the solution would be, and then someone says, why don't we ask the AI? I see some hands, yeah? And who of you was thinking back then, I really don't think that's a good idea, for example, to ask health questions to ChatGPT. Okay, most of you. Great, thank you. So I'm not alone with the feeling I have about AI and the debate we have in our society. This reminds me a lot of magical thinking. And that's what the next talk will be about. The title is Sacrificing Chickens Properly. A very useful skill, by the way. Why magical thinking is both the problem and the solution. Please give a very warm applause to Senana. She is an anthropologist and a computer scientist, and therefore she sees AI from a very special perspective. Please give an applause to Senana.
The anthropologist Martin Klaas studied villagers in a rural area in Southeast Asia. When they brought in the harvest, he observed two things. First, they would sacrifice a chicken with biscuits and incense, the usual, to the spirit of the field. That field spirit was believed to be the spirit of the original owner of the field, which still resided in the soil, and had the power to grant or deny good harvests. Second, the farmer would put away part of the harvest in a separate compartment. That would be handed over to the landlord. It was believed that paying taxes would allow the farmer to farm his field the next year. To us, one of these needs an explanation. But why? For the farmer, both are equally real and normal. Think about it. Just a spontaneous gut feeling. How do you know that there cannot be such a thing as a spirit of the field? You have less data than the farmer does. It's a trick question, of course. We know that the universe is governed by laws of nature, and no personified entities anywhere. But how do you know this? Have you ever seen an atom? Are you sure that the negative charge of an electron is not caused by imps with very strict rules about how to move around? Physicists don't. I asked, and science only goes for why is deep? Why are the lights on? Electricity. Why is the electricity? Electrons moving. Why do electrons move? Because they're negatively charged. Why are they negatively charged? We don't know yet. And we all know that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, so technically, that physicist would have no reason to exclude imps from his realm of explanations. But if you're really honest, you probably have some visceral resistance towards the imps. On the other hand, the hacker's jargon file contains this. Voodoo programming is the use by guess or cookbook of an obscure or hairy system, feature, or algorithm that one does not truly understand. It may work, may not. If it doesn't, you won't know why. And the other thing, of course, is you do something that really should not work, and it ends up working anyway, and such as recompiling everything. Every technical person from different fields I've talked to makes the same face and adds a story. And I mean, I was surprised at the amount of cult-related references in said jargon file. Also, I have yet to meet a programmer who doesn't personify their code to some degree, or may I quote, I don't personify my code, but my code would disagree. I'm a researcher. I studied cultural anthropology, I did the usual beat, was with a witch doctor, which I'm not supposed to call that way, but she did cure witchcraft-related illnesses and diarrhea. And nowadays I spend my time watching people use software, also called UX research. As an anthropologist, I could sit back, write my paper, and marvel in the cultural relativism of describing people's funny beliefs. Since I do work in projects, I need to solve problems. And unfortunately, for requirements engineering, UX, and also building cisterns or the toilets which avoid the diarrhea, right? You're reliant on things that people know, and you cannot do it on your own, and you don't have the power or the resources to test everything. And one thing I've learned is the quality of someone's story, to me, has no correlation with the quality of their empiricism. Perhaps even an inverse correlation. I've seen very smart doers have horrible stories and inversely. And the effectiveness of their actions. So there's the researcher's dilemma. You can't trust what people say, obviously, but you can't trust that you can't trust them either. And in the project world, with limited time and budget, you sometimes cannot trust your own data for various reasons. So what to do? I've developed one or the other tools and tricks of the trade, and today I would like to give a glimpse into what we can call the ethnographer's eye in order to get better information. Quickly, people aren't stupid just because they talk funny. Good life lesson. And even smart language can say stupid things. Just because something is put into mathematics does not mean it is right, and practicing mathematics does not make you a non-cult follower. Look up Pythagoras, it's fun. And we're going to go into how language works and why some magical thinking is baked into it, and then try out two techniques: how to get information out of stories and how to talk to non-experts with some final thoughts. So first, let's define. There is obviously unhelpful magical thinking. To all the anthropologists, I am very sorry. I am not talking, of course, about the practice of magic. Different story. So that would be applying an idea about causality onto a field where it doesn't fit. Or even believing too much into a metaphor or model and thinking that the map is the territory. There is, however, also the helpful magical thinking, as we saw, like the personification of code, without which I would never have learned how to code. And that would be using an image or metaphor to effectively chunk information. I would call that thinking with your whole brain, because it accesses your intuition. So, great, no? Let's get the useful and avoid the unhelpful. It's not that easy. Magical thinking is baked into thinking, and that's because of how language works. For those of you that would like a definition of language, that was a fun month. Defining language is surprisingly hard. I'm going to go with the pragmatic, prototypical definition, meaning the cliché member of the species is in the middle. Natural language, the one I'm speaking right now, and then the more or less languagey things are around that until we end up with non-language, and I would not possibly know where to place LLMs in that graph. But it's less important and less interesting what language is. It's more interesting, how does it come into being? Because languages move and change, and they're not uniform. And if we can look at the change, we might look at the thinking underneath. So how are terms formed? Let's try something. Look at this. Spontaneous thoughts. What do you see? Just a word. Is a wave a thing? It is in your head. You can draw an icon of it. You might have physical sensations of being hit by one, but it only exists as long as it exists. It's the most perfect example because technically it's just water. And remember that because all things are a bit like that. If you thought beach or romantic getaway or good surf spot or even just the sea, congratulations, you've run into the first problem, framing. What you see depends on your perspective, and that is one thing. There is no pseudo-reflect your own internal core beliefs. The camera is invisible, even to you. But let's lift the hood a tiny bit. How is the first language learned? In the beginning, you don't just learn how to talk, you learn how to think as well. The early years are spent in what I would lovingly call soup, a continuous stream of sensory experience labeled just by meh or So no wave yet, just water. Then you acquire what's called proto-terms. It's rough bundles of experience. You say hat when you actually mean I feel antsy, I think I need to play. The last time we went out to play, you made me put on my hat, I want to go play. Or you say squawk to everything with feathers. In this phase, there is no class object, to use a familiar term. You don't even have a sense of time. All of that is a long process of installing libraries. And then it gets interesting, because the next level is what's called base level categories. Those are all prototypical, meaning you can draw an icon of it. And importantly, there's actions associated with it. Base level categories are culture stable. If you look at intercultural analysis of different languages, people end up in the same environments with the same base level categories, which is not true for other layers. A chair is a base level. It allows you to sit on it. It has a typical shape, whereas furniture is not, because you cannot draw a typical furniture, and there isn't one set of actions how to interact with it. If you become an expert, this is how language is formed, the basic level, which is the normal unit of conversation, moves. It would be weird to say life form when you want to say chicken. And that is not incidental. If you become an expert, you would differentiate out the different species and put your base levels lower. So there is already a sort of thinking baked into language, because words are made for things you need to talk about. On top of that, there's abstract categories, such as the aforementioned furniture. And these cluster the base levels into still waves. Because as we know with the term fashionable, what is referenced by categories keeps moving. So there's getters and setters, so to speak. It's the good kind of groupthink. What people have a word for is what people need to talk about. For instance, there is a culture which does not have a word for sadness. People are, of course, sad, but they label it as illness. And consequently, this culture does not have rituals around grief. They send them to the rituals around illness. So it's always an indication words are smart. And also, a chicken by any other name would not smell as sweet. If it's a pet, there's different feelings, different everything than if it was dinner or wildlife. I call this human-sized language because it's descriptive, acquired by lived experience, and like in a computer game, if you put a human into the situation, similar things would end up being the result. There is, however, a different type of words in the mix. which is what I call system-sized language. These are things where saying if they exist or not is a bit tricky because they aren't descriptive. They ought to be true. Money, the law, companies. These are all true because and as long as people make them true. Nations, lovingly called imagined communities in anthropology. And to understand system-sized categories, understand soccer. I don't. I see 22 people running around, chasing a ball. My instinct tells me, give them 22 balls. But when I start playing soccer over time, I start to get attached to the outcome. I start feeling something with a goal. And that means that my physical biology is changed by something which, well, is obviously made up, but I would not want to discuss with a stadium that soccer isn't real. So these categories are half real, which is a term used to describe games, but it's just perfect. And remember that. They access physiological processes in your body so that to you, I will not quote the Matrix right now, they are equally real as the chickens and the chairs. One more thought. What if the farmer's son becomes a communist, stops believing in private property, the revolution succeeds, does the landlord cease to exist? You see now, both of these need an explanation. To summarize, part of the ethnographer's eye is to take a peek into language and not just treat all words equally. And that means you want to kind of access what people mean and how much that makes sense. And one good axiom to go by is everything makes sense somewhere. Remember, language is smart because people have reason enough to talk about it. Because if it doesn't make sense, it's not a thing. Things are waves, and everything that exists has a process, how it comes into being. That could be human-sized or system-sized. Pro tip, mixing the two up is not type-safe. Now that we've established this, let's play. First example would be leadership, one of my favorites. It's kind of smack in the middle and a fun category because there is a cluster of happenings in the world that you could share and say leadership has happened, probably, but is it in the one leading, the one being led, the relation between the two, or the affected environment? Yes. It's tricky, though, to say, I am going to lead now. And I'm always a bit antsy when people talk about leadership as if it was some ominous thing that needs to be called upon. On the other side, the placebo in medicine is a victim to the wrong kind of eye, because that one is actually almost human-sized. And once you start taking those categories apart, you'll see why I see chickens being sacrificed everywhere. We need more leadership. Put away that knife you're sharpening. We need that feature because the competition has it. As the end of an argument and not the beginning, I smell chickens. And measuring customer satisfaction or certain things via a questionnaire, if not done right, you might as well sprinkle blood all over the page. So let's go into how reverse engineering is done. I would say you could call it a consistency check. If you meet somebody doing something you're not quite sure about, ask, is it a thing? Or do they believe it's a thing? Let's do an exercise. We will investigate another spirit. It's a mythical creature. To the non-Germans in the audience, the pig dog is believed to be an entity which affects humans. It eats up motivation and particularly hates sports and broccoli. And people claim that the pig dog did things to them and it keeps them from doing what's good for them. Ethnographer's eye, is it a thing? No. The existence of Arnold Schwarzenegger refutes that hypothesis. Also, go to the gym at 7 a.m. and I actually like broccoli. More tricky, do they believe it's a thing? You need a bit of a larger data set, but the answer is kinda. There are people who are affected by what in medical anthropology we would call a culture-bound syndrome. Their pig dog is way too real for them, whereas others use it more in the style of pig dog ate my homework. The question to ask is very simple. Do they suffer from it? Because waves are there all the time. You will find debris. And if there's no debris, wave hasn't happened. If it's only around when convenient, people don't actually thingify what they talk about. And trick question, how do you know the farmer believes in the field spirit more or less than the Germans do in their pig dog? Second point, in the toolbox, communicating with non-experts. Tiny experiment. I could summarize this talk. To put it simply, language items are in an n-dimensional vector space. The ones who appreciate that summary, I see someone nodding there, probably consider natural language good enough for telling other primates where the nuts are. But unless you have studied mathematics for a while, it's really not helping. So non-experts have no chance when it comes to expert domains because every new language acquisition, other than the basic library of human-sized, starts with soup again. And the hardware takes a few years. Non-experts need human-sized stories, which is categories that imply what to expect and what to do with the thing. And if you pick something from everyday experience, you will instinctively access the basic library, which again is culture stable, exists across and below languages. And I'll just give a tiny example. Everybody has an idea of what I mean if I say the prices rise. But it doesn't make equal sense to say the prices go to the left across cultures. Why? Because growing up human, you have the embodied experience that if you pile up stuff, there's more stuff, so up is more. Also, up is better is one of those stable ones, or even a link between hygiene and moral compass. Fun stuff. Warning though, if you don't provide a human-sized story, one might randomly attach itself. Because words are pointers and the brain hates a null pointer exception. The warning comes from this beautiful story because the theory of evolution is wonderful and helpful. It is most definitely not a human competition. But if people think that it is, and you hear it, this is a beautiful thing that you can easily do yourself. You hear what the metaphor underneath is when you hear them talk and the words they use. So what makes a good story? It gives you a guidance what to expect in terms of behavior. It implies what you can do with it. It also gives you what is this, like kind of a social space map. Unfortunately, though, you cannot just make those up. They're like a hit movie. Many movies could qualify, but there's something magic about which ones work. So it's trial and error. But a good metaphor is also robust. It's safe to play with. I do this when I need to work with people from different fields because I cannot study everything, but I sometimes need to work with everyone. And then I go and do my own human-sized stories and ask the expert, can I get away with this? Meaning, is it okay to base my decisions on this metaphor? Will it be somewhat reasonable, safe to play with? And when the expert says yes, I can get quite a long way without actually knowing much about the subject. And one area where this would be sorely needed is, that's what it draws when I ask it how humans see it. I'm scared. So how to communicate about LLMs without the people you communicate to having studied for a few years? The word intelligence is not just misleading, it's positively dangerous. It begs for a personification which implies all the wrong things. It opens up all the doors for manipulation. And when I have to read studies where people from different companies say, oh, AI makes more objective decisions. I smell chickens! So that's not helping. What did I do? Last year, I didn't know about LLMs, but one congress cured me. I did study computer science after all. And I remembered what my data scientist friend told me. The intelligence of the common LLM is about as much as a small child, but children grow up, so I was going with an animal. And you can address it, as we all know, in human language, but that won't work all that well. It's better to address it as if it was code, which it is, but it will still end up eating the chocolate or throwing over the coffee on the keyboard. I kind of feel it's like Simon's cat. So that reifies, like that puts into a metaphor everything that I want to remind myself when using it. That's just for me. Do better. I'll sum up what we've just discussed with the simple causality is hard. Why are we doing this? Causality isn't just take chicken, take knife, cut throat, blood spills, chicken dead, the direct causality. There is complex problems. There is emergence. There are forests which have dynamics that are nonlinear, and for all those things, sometimes the language of stories can be quite helpful because, remember, cultures can learn at a time scale different than humans. And it doesn't mean they're smarter. It just means they've been around for longer. If you look into how many of these seemingly religious practices have a solid ecological or social or economic reason, you'd be surprised. Anthropology left me with the beautiful feeling that people, well, to be exact, peoples, aren't stupid. Leave them alone for 5 minutes and they build pyramids. And yes, I have met people. I have to remind myself frequently, but nowadays I use the ethnographer's eye to tackle the really difficult intercultural challenges, talking to marketing and sales. I can only give you the idea of trying this. Everybody can do it. Because it's like reverse engineering, emulating a cultural logic and perspective. If you get like deep into whole pictures and frames, and these were just 2 examples, there's more. You actually know what it feels like, because it's like learning to program in different programming paradigms. Or reverse engineering code in a different. It's possible, takes time, inevitably gives you a headache. But when you got it, it feels like that. In so many ways, exactly like that, because it's always interestingly different underneath the surface. One last thought. There is another way to sacrifice chickens properly. The jargon file I told you we would get to the chickens specifies waving a dead chicken as performing a ritual in the direction of software or hardware that one believes to be futile, but is necessary to keep the stakeholders happy. If you take a more positive spin, what's not too well known is that sacrifices, especially of food items, tend to get eaten. It's really lovely. You put food on an altar, you have your little sing-song, and then everybody takes the food and has a large picnic. And the atmosphere, it actually feels like ordering pizza or, well, chicken wings for the team event. So perhaps a sacrifice to the team spirit is also a nice thing to do every now and then. And that kind of sacrificing chickens doesn't have to make sense. It creates meaning. And that is something we should all do more often. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this talk. Now I'm hungry and craving chickens, to be honest. And we have 10 minutes now for some Q&A. Is there a question in the room? There are some microphones and you can just wait there. Or I'm looking at the signal angels. Can we start with a question from the internet?
Yes, we have a question from the internet. Do you think that the LLMs integrating in our society will change the way we interact with other humans, especially children which grow up with chatbots around?
Yes, definitely. You can also already see this, and that is one of the things that gives me nightmares, because remember how the soup and the proto-terms, when the class object and especially entity is installed, there's glitches. And you can make a relation with what's called mental health issues. So if you haven't learned how to deal with humans as humans, which already happens, LLMs or no, this can leave lasting damage. Good parentage, a good home, enough play mitigates that. So it's not, again, no, not the direct causality, but the presence of LLMs is definitely not helping.
Is there another question from the internet?
None so far.
Ben, microphone number 3.
Okay, thank you for this wonderful talk and the great start. My first question is, how do you keep sane if you have to question yourself all the time? And I know that from social studies, etc., just messes with your head at some point. And secondly, we just had the question of interaction. I just read that there is now like a Jesus chatbot, Jesus LLM, so we can start integrating LLMs into religion. Do you think that could give another twist to how we consider religion if suddenly God, with huge marks, starts talking back?
Oh, good Lord, how do I answer this shortly? Let's start with the first one. How do I keep saying? Thanks for asking. I do not recommend this. Don't try it at home. There is no such thing as pseudo-question your core beliefs. And it does leave marks, and it's an occupational hazard. Contact with humans, and especially contact with normal people, keeps me sane, and if all else fails, going to the forest. It's questioning yourself. Like, I don't trust myself either, and I always trust myself, and I've learned to embrace ambivalence, would be the serious answer, and started to find it fun. Kind of a Stockholm syndrome. The second one, the Jesus LLM. Oh my God, so many things to say about that. There is this social function which religion has in other cultures. The monotheistic big ones are not the typical religions. And there is always kind of law and religion and politics are siblings which share a space. And that means putting something in the middle, which, as I read in those studies, like it makes more objective decisions, always has a transaction cost, because it means fights will end. And in certain situations, it's worth more to the culture that people stop fighting than who wins. So on social dynamic level, it doesn't matter what you put in the middle. You just need something. And LLMs are unfortunately positioned to be that something, but I'm more afraid about actors who use this to their advantage. And if we don't find another metaphor than intelligence, look up the history of intelligence tests. This is already right up there. That's not even system-sized. That's what tied in with values, and I need to answer this question more shortly. Did I answer it, or good?
Thanks. Thank you for this question. Number 4, please.
Hi, I love the talk. I'm wondering, what can we do now that like an unhelpful metaphor like intelligence has taken root? How can we affect this? Like, what can we in this room do?
Pick one and stick with it. So the way I do is I feel like I use my own. I am human too, and like I play with it, and you access as many humans as you can. And I say human in this case, like the more somebody is an expert, the less this trick works. And you see if it really sticks, and you pick the metaphor that is safe to play with, and then just use the one that gains traction, because it is, unfortunately, it has to go viral on its own, but a good metaphor will at least stand a fighting chance of doing so, and that means pick one and stick with it, because our technical ones, like, how do I translate, like mansplaining as a service, that's fun, but it doesn't do the job. Or the Wortfindungsautomat, however that is in English.
Thank you. Number 2, please.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the great talk. There's a phrase I've heard before that within artificial intelligence, the actual intelligence is internal. And
Internal?
Yeah, like it's a projection of the user, right? The user's intelligence. And that was specifically in regards to something like ELIZA, right? Where you have a very simple piece of software that can sort of reflect your own thoughts back at you in a certain way. And the question that I'm getting to, in your model of how language develops, or in the one you presented, there is a talk about like proto-terms that relate to actual physical things and system terms that relate to interactions between people. But I think there's also a lot of, within magical thinking, there's a lot of also relations to the internal state, the emotional state, and I'm curious how that fits into that language model.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you give me a brief summary? I mean, I could answer with what I personally suspect about AI based on all these things, which is there is intelligence baked into language. And I think that the algorithm kind of grabs that, and it doesn't reflect you back to you, but it just feeds upon the already present knowledge, but it would be static, because real human language is always moving. It never loses the touching the ground factor, and anything derivative and mixed, especially, like if you mix, I would love to have a project where you study if the vectors between words differ in different languages, because they would actually have to. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that would be one thought in that direction.
And the last question goes to number 4, or no, number 1.
Yeah, at a lot of workplaces, the priests, aka managers, often feel like we should have a bit of a shared religion, which to them can mean let's have like a soccer tournament. And then as normal people, we usually don't agree. We'd much rather have a Doom tournament or maybe an archery tournament or something like that. How can we convert them to our religion?
Ask the missionaries. Conversion is something I don't even touch as a UX researcher. Not going there.
Thank you so much.